Mm.
Hey everybody, if you're just joining us, we're just waiting for the number of participants to level out here. So thanks for being on and we'll get started here in a second. Hey Leah, I can't see on my end the participants, but if you think we've leveled off, let us know and we'll just jump in.
Yeah, it looks like it has leveled off, James. Did you see Bridget's comment in the chat?
I did.
She shared there's an updated version of the slideshow from the website.
Okay, great. What do you think, Leah? Should we get started?
Yeah, I think it looks good.
Cool. Hey, welcome everybody. This is Coastal Steelhead season planning town hall number 2. Looks like our numbers have leveled off, so we'll jump in. I'm gonna have Kelly Cunningham kick it off for us here.
Yeah, thanks, James. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great, thank you. Hey, just wanted to express my appreciation for folks tuning in on a Monday night after a holiday weekend. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, had an opportunity to eat a whole bunch of food, gain some weight, and hang out with loved ones. Hope you all had a great weekend. We're here tonight kind of to finalize the season planning process. You're going to hear some stuff tonight from James and his team, but before you do, maybe just a couple comments. Really appreciate the input we've received from the public through our portal, online portal, and just individual emails we received. They've been really helpful and helped us shape the proposed regulations you're going to see here tonight. I say proposed regulations because they're not finalized yet. And what I mean by that is really twofold. One, these management plans that we're going to be talking about later need to be signed by the director. They haven't been signed yet, and until they are signed, I'm a little hesitant to call them final. I don't have any indication that he won't sign them, but what you're going to see tonight are the regulations that we're planning to put forward to the director for his signature. The one caveat is with the Grays Harbor system. We have more conversations we need to have with co-managers. We intend to do that this week, and we're hopeful that we're able to land those conversations in a place that results in some opportunity on those river systems targeting hatchery fish. So we worked hard to meet the deadline. We got some more work to do. We're committed to doing that work, and we're going to have those conversations starting middle of this week. I also want to, in addition to appreciating the folks that have participated and hung with us through this process, I just want to appreciate the work that goes into coastal steelhead season planning. It really starts in April, May timeframe. We're on the spawning grounds. We're counting reds, we're estimating, you know, future abundance, and through the entire summer, we're working really closely with the co-managers. When I say we, it's really James and his team. There's a lot of scramble that happens between that kind of late July, August, September timeframe, and it doesn't slow down until you know, where we're at tonight, the end of November. So it's a lot of work. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that I appreciate that work. I hope you all do as well. We don't often get a lot of high fives for the regulations we promulgate. I'm hoping people are understanding kind of the challenges we have with coastal steelhead. If you've been paying attention, we're on a close to 30-year long-term decline. We've got some systems where we've seen the lowest escapement, if you will, on recorded history in 3 of the last 5 years. We're also facing a potential ESA listing. So this is not easy work that these folks are doing. That said, we couldn't do it without your input. I know there's a lot of chatter out there in social media land about, well, they're just going to do what they want to do anyway. I'm here to tell you nothing can be further from the truth. Tonight, you're going to see the results of the modeling that James's staff have done associated with the proposals that we've received from the public. So rest assured that your thought that you put into these regulations, we take that to heart. We do what we can to try to make them work, and if they can work, we're going to incorporate them. You're going to hear tonight of an example of that on the Hoh system. That said, we don't expect to please everybody, but I am proud that we're making good progress, I feel, and that's due in large part to your participation and the hard work of the folks in Region 6. So, like I said, more work to be done on Grays Harbor. We're committed to that work. Hopefully we'll be able to issue a news release that formalizes what you're going to hear tonight, and hopefully incorporates the Grays Harbor system. We're looking at Wednesday, hopefully, for that news release to go out where everything's finalized and you can maybe do some planning around your fisheries this winter out on the coast. And with that, I'll stop jabbering and turn it over to you, James, so you can introduce your team. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. Yeah, and thanks for the kind words there. Thanks for everybody joining. I'm James Losey. I'm the regional program manager for Region 6. I'm here with a bunch of my colleagues that helped with this work. And there's about 100 more of us that are either on the spawning grounds right now or at a hatchery facility doing that work as well. So big high five to all of them, as Kelly mentioned. I also want to flag, though, before we introduce everybody, the huge collaboration with our colleagues at Olympic National Park. They're part of every step of the way here as we're talking through these regulations and where we're going to land for non-treaty sport fisheries. And then, of course, our tribal co-managers on the coast. Ton of work in many systems. The majority of the work comes from our tribal co-managers. Other systems are split right down the middle, and other systems, you know, we're carrying a big part of that workload. So a lot of collaboration here in the coastal range. So thanks to all those that got us here. And I want to also mention, if you're just joining us today and you're thinking we're going to move through these 9 or so slides really fast and there's a bunch of information you didn't have, we had a town hall about a month ago. This is like chapter 2 of the work for this season. So you can go online, you can watch about an hour long of information, about more like 50 slides of forecast and run size and just all that background I think you might want if you're just jumping in here. But we're going to race through this pretty quick tonight and hopefully leave a bunch of time for questions and discussion. So I want to start. I'm just going to go down the screen here with folks on my team that joined me. And so I'll start. I see Amy, you're first. If you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amy Edwards. I work as a stock assessment biologist for Region 6, and I primarily kind of help with creel surveys along the coast.
Thanks, Amy. Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Whitney. I'm the district fish biologist for the North Coast and the Strait of Longitude.
Thanks, Jenny. Rob?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Rob Allen. I'm the Region 6 Hatchery Operations Manager.
And Mike?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Scharf. I'm the District 17 Fisheries Biologist covering Queets, Quinault, and Grays Harbor basins.
Thanks, Mike. Nick?
Hey, thanks for joining tonight, everyone. My name is Nick Van Buskirk. I'm the stock assessment biologist in Willapa Bay.
Cool, thanks, Nick. Bridget?
Hi, I'm Bridget Meir. I'm Coastal Region Communications Specialist. Thank you all for joining.
And Mark?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the town hall. I'm Mark Iwasa. I'm the WDFW Communications Manager.
I see Gabe on too. I don't see your camera, Gabe, but if you're there, feel free to jump on and say hi.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Gabe Madel. I'm the district fish biologist for South Puget Sound.
Cool. And then I want to circle back and have Leah go last. If I missed anybody from the stock assessment team, it could be my camera just didn't catch you. So, all right. Otherwise, Leah.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. I'm Leah Snyder. I am the admin assistant for hatcheries and fish management statewide, and I'm going to walk you through some guidelines for our webinar. As you entered the webinar, you were muted automatically. To ask a question, please raise your hand. If calling in, dial *9 or use the hand icon at the bottom of your screen if you're joining from a computer. When asked for questions and comments, we will unmute you in your turn, but you can unmute yourself using the mute button on your device or dialing *6 on your phone. If you experience technical issues during the webinar, please let us know in the chat and we will assist you. And we ask that you treat everyone respectfully and avoid personal attacks, insults, or threats. Please discuss issues and questions rather than attacking individuals or organizations. Offensive, disrespectful, or derogatory language, including profanity, is prohibited. Please limit the length and number of times you speak on each topic for a balanced discussion, and assume positive intentions from those speaking and listen respectfully. If you have any further questions or comments, please share them in written format online at wdfw.wa.gov/coastal-steelhead. And sorry for everyone on my reading just now. Go ahead, James.
Leah, I thought you did great. And that webpage Leah just read at the bottom of the page contains all that information I talked about from the town hall #1 and other things I think that might be helpful. So click on that or type it into your browser if you need more info. So we'll just jump in here. We don't have a lot of material, but I'm going to walk through each one of these slides carefully. So the first thing I wanted to do was talk about this public process, this last month of work, or as Kelly described, really the last 4 or 5 months, we've been hearing from folks on what they're thinking about coastal steelhead. So at that first town hall, it says here approximately 150 people attended. At one time, there was just over 200. So a lot of participation in that first town hall. But also through that online portal that Leah just talked about, phone conversations, email, traffic, and letters. We've just had hundreds of suggestions, comments, feedback, really long conversations with a lot of folks from the fishing community and conservation community about coastal steelhead. So really thorough process here that has been really engaging for us and helpful. Some of the key concepts we've heard, so there's a lot of things we've heard, but the ones that we hear repeatedly is there's this strong desire from folks out here in the coastal range for a conservative approach. And a lot of folks thought we hit that last year. We heard support for last year's regulations. We also heard folks that requested that we close systems that are not meeting escapement or continually not meeting escapement goals. Strong desire from folks to increase hatchery targeted fisheries. We reported in the past, that we've got this large number of hatchery fish returning to hatchery racks from closed or even just more conservative fisheries. Folks are interested in the use of bait. Some people really miss using bait in certain systems where they were used to it. There's this interest in fishing in April. We talked more about that in the last town hall, and we can talk more about it today. And then these last three bullets are all sort of surrounding this restriction on the use of fishing from a boat. So a lot of people are interested in increasing this boat fishing opportunity. So we know it's made it really challenging for folks not only to catch fish, but to go fishing in some cases. So we're continue to hear feedback on that. But we also hear people, many, a growing number of individuals that are suggesting they want to see increased restrictions on fishing out of a boat. People are reporting really great etiquette associated with these new rules, improved fishing overall, and just improved fishing experience. So a lot of folks really have come to enjoy this experience they get when this regulation's in place. And then to kind of tie those two together, since maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we've heard a lot of folks scrutinize this regulation and its ability to reduce encounters on wild steelhead. And so for years now, people have wanted us to formally evaluate that boat fishing restriction and add precision around the savings for wild steelhead associated with the rule. So we've heard more and more pressure each year. We're listening to that, and we've looked for opportunities to formally evaluate that rule in a scientific fashion. And so we put here that Region 6 team, folks on this call and some that aren't, analyzed more than 20 specific proposals. This number could also be maybe 200. We've heard a lot of ideas. But when we narrow these down to those that really check those 4 boxes at the bottom that you've heard us talk about a lot: abundance, productivity, distribution, and diversity. These are these 4 metrics that we talk a lot about, and we see them in the statewide steelhead management plan. So we're really targeting regulations and specifically proposals for our work that check all these boxes. So at least 20, that we've formally evaluated, done the math to see if they kind of meet the rigor of our conservation objectives. So jumping right into the results of that work, this is a pretty busy table, so I'm going to pause on it, but I think it does a good job of describing how all these proposals get put into a math problem that we could solve for meeting conservation objectives. So on the left, you can see it's going from south to north, so Willapa Bay to the Quileute system. You can see all these rivers, and next to them, these are the sport impact limits we shared with you last month. And these are the limits of wild steelhead mortalities in each one of these systems. So we're designing fisheries around these numbers. So we need to stay below them. And then across the top, you can see we've just taken 5 of these proposals and really grouped a number of ideas people have had into these 5 basic proposals. So people could visualize how we're thinking about the math and how it fits into a result here. So each box is colored based on whether the fishery would be open or closed under a certain regulation in a specific river. And so the way you can think about this is we can imagine that we were going to take one regulation and apply it to the entire coast. So kind of a one size fits all. And if we did that with the status quo regulation, so that's the second one, this pre-2019, we could highlight the regulations that would result from that. So if we set ourselves to this one size fits all and we were all deciding that we were going to go status quo and back to normal, we can do the math. And what we see is in places like Willapa or maybe even the Quileute River, we could design a status quo regulation. But in places like the Chehalis, Humptulips, Upper Quinault, Queets, and the Hoh, we would see that we would likely exceed our sport impact limits, and those fisheries would be closed as a result of that regulation and the modeling work here. The asterisk in some of these boxes denotes where that margin of error is really tight, so there's a lot of uncertainty. So to design a regulation where we've placed an asterisk, we'd have special considerations around shifting effort or around the monitoring need necessary to design a fishery that would not exceed these sport impact limits. So this is just a scenario here to kind of demonstrate how this table works, but we're not interested in that kind of one size fits all approach. We're looking watershed by watershed, trying to maximize opportunity within these conservation limits. So that's what we've done. So the fisheries that we've put forward to the director and are included in these co-manager agreed to plans are now, I'm going to click on this, are now highlighted in the boxes here. So I'll go from top to bottom and demonstrate how this works. So in the Willapa Bay, where we have 409 wild sport impact limits, we're proposing a fishing from a boat rule in select waters, something very similar to the status quo in Willapa Bay. And we'll walk through specific details on each one of these. In the Chehalis and hump tulips, we're going to come to after this slide, but none of these basic regulation proposals would work and keep us within these sport impact limits. So you'll see all of those boxes are red and nothing's got a bold square around it. If we look at the upper Quinault and also the Queets Clearwater, we have full closures planned for those systems. In the Hoh and the Quileute, we have fishing from boat and selected waters. And both of those are set up for expanded fishing from boat opportunities. And we're going to walk through specific details on the Hoh. I want to highlight here, before I move off of this slide, the asterisk in the Hoh, fish from boat and select waters. Remind people that this represents the margin of error being really tight. So we have a special plan for the Hoh River that we'll walk through in its own slide here. But if we dig in a little closer to the Chehalis and hump tulips, a large number of the proposals we received were creative ways that we could craft fisheries in these systems. And so we've taken these 214 impacts in the Chehalis, we've distributed them across the watershed based on their representative spawning distribution, and tried to take the available monitoring resources and craft these very specific fisheries targeting hatchery steelhead in hopes of, number one, creating fishing opportunity, but also gaining really important information about our level of impact associated with these fisheries. So start to generate some data. So the way this could look is that we design these 4 separate fisheries, and we've done this work, and we have a plan that we're really proud of to fish in the Wainuchi, Satsip, Skookumchuck, and hump tulips. These fisheries would take place from December 1 through the end of March. And impacts would be limited to these numbers you can see highlighted in blue in these systems. So these fisheries would have creel monitoring, intensive creel monitoring in these areas you can see highlighted on the maps. We'd have weekly updates for ourselves on what wild steelhead encounters are looking like, so we could adjust these fisheries, either expand or contract them based on these impact limits. And so we're really excited about this plan. As Kelly mentioned, there's further conversations that need to take place that are planned for this week with our co-managers, specifically the Quinault Indian Nation. So if those conversations go well and we get co-manager agreement here, we plan on moving forward with these fisheries. But right now, this is not the current regulation. So I want to just be really clear. This is the work we've done to set this up. From a conservation perspective, I just want to highlight, we know the Chehalis, is more than 1,000 fish under escapement, but from an impact on wild steelhead, we specifically, Mike Scharf and his team, are estimating less than a 3% exploitation rate on wild steelhead in the Chehalis. And we imagine it to be closer to 1 or 1.5%, but we need those data to understand it really well. So this is a really responsible plan, and we're really proud of it from a conservation perspective. Now, this is Grays Harbor. We talked about this proposal and our work this week to get co-manager agreement on this work. I want to now shift to the Hoh River. I'm going to go back to that last slide just so folks are really clear what we're talking about. We've got this Hoh River regulation that we're putting in front of the director here and seeking his approval of this work. And I want to dig into it a little bit deeper. So the title of this slide says Hoh River Fishery and Evaluation of the No Fishing Out of a Boat regulation. So like I mentioned before, a lot of people are interested in increased precision around this regulation. Does it work? And if it does, what's the power of this in reducing encounters on wild steelhead? So with these less than 500 impacts, we have a really tight margin of error for any expanded boat fishing. But we've done the math, and with a regulation that allows fishing out of a boat in certain areas at certain times, we're confident we can meet those conservation objectives or adjust if we need to. So the objective this season in the Hoh River will be to estimate the effect of restricting fishing from a boat on the encounter rate of both wild and hatchery steelhead. And then I say this, also it's important to know while meeting these conservation objectives in 2023 and 24. So it's a one-time study that we plan on conducting in the Hoh River to really understand this regulation, while also meeting the conservation objectives. So our strategy to pull this off is to alternate boat restrictions throughout the fishing season. So multiple areas of the Hoh River experience the fishing regulation using a boat and also the restriction on using a boat at different times and different parts of the river. So this is going to take really strategic monitoring during the fishing season. So we've had intensive creel for the last couple of years, but we've rallied the creel team and the science division to talk about what would the creel have to look like to come out of this season with this really precise estimate of savings associated with the regulation. We also need really tight monitoring because if we move a month into this season and we learn that there's risk of us exceeding our sport impact limits or not living up to our co-manager agreement, we want to be able to make adjustments on the fly in season. So the monitoring is going to be critical this year in the Hoh River specifically. We're going to rely heavily on enforcement. This is going to be a pretty complex regulation. And so enforcement will be out there, of course, helping educate, but also enforcing this rule because the data and the result that we come out of this with is only going to be good as people are at following this rule. So enforcement is going to be paramount. And if you're coming from, maybe you're fishing the Hoh River and you don't live in Forks, coming from out of town, the communication with folks on what the regulation is going to be critical. So the application on the phone that tells us the regulations needs to be spot on, and all of these tools need to be enhanced. So we've got a plan to make sure folks know when and where they can fish and what type of gear they can use. So a lot of pieces moving into this, but if we look at this map, you can see this is the Hoh River, if you're not familiar with it. The area in red, this is in our permanent regulations, no fishing from a boat. And so that will remain this season. So that area in red is not changing. And Jenny, Whitney, and others on the team are going to jump in when I say something that's wrong, hopefully. But in the lower section, here it's denoted this experimental area. This is the area we'd like to both study and increase fishing from a boat. So we've got two sections of the river here we're going to use to alternate fishing from a boat. And this next slide will describe this a little bit more in detail. So this table is meant to show where fishing from a boat will be allowed and where it will not be allowed, and on which days folks can use the boat to fish from. So on the left, we broke the river up into the lower, the middle, the South Fork, and the Upper Hoh. And then there's a description there of these different sections. The key here is the South Fork and the Upper Hoh, like I mentioned, will not be allowed to fish from a boat. So those are all in red. The lower and the middle will depend on which day you plan on fishing. From a scientific perspective, study design perspective, this is going to be a great way for us to assess changes in impact to wild steelhead across flow and time, across hatchery and wild steelhead, and other, weather events that may occur. But from a fishing perspective, this will be a challenge, and it'll be really important folks keep an eye on the schedule, and maybe they're sticking it to the dash on their car or something. I think we've got, I wanted to highlight here, specifically, we're talking about sections of river people that fish the Hoh are quite familiar with, from Oxbow down and Oxbow up to Morgan's Crossing. These are the two sections that will alternate depending on the day of the week. A last note on this regulation, our plan today is to start December 1 and move through the end of March. So closing this fishery April 1. But like I mentioned, we'll be weekly looking at the total impact, not so much the results from this study. That's going to come later through a rigorous analysis. But what we want to know is total impact across the system in season. We want to make sure we're monitoring this close. So we're going to watch this weekly, communicate our results with our co-managers, and make adjustments to this plan if it looks like, we're headed down a path we didn't anticipate, either, lower impacts than we thought or greater. So I shared a lot in that. I'm just going to pause on this slide for a minute and we'll have time to come back for questions. So this slide, this is, I think, my last slide, and it's just to summarize kind of all the things we talked about, but something more similar to what you would see in the pamphlet, so you can get an understanding of how each of these regulations would look. I have a few things blocking my screen, so I'm going to move things around and I'm going to read these. So in the Willapa Bay system, the plan is to open December 1 through March. Some tributaries close February 28th. Folks might be familiar with that. Selective gear, one single point barbless hook. This restricts the use of bait, release wild rainbow trout. We're going to have a 2 hatchery steelhead bag limit, and fishing from a floating device will be allowed in Willapa Bay systems. So that's a change from last season. The main change there is fishing from a floating device is allowed. And I just want to pause. One reason for that change isn't that we have a higher abundance of steelhead necessarily. It's very close to last year, but we learned a lot from our monitoring program last season that our impacts in Willapa Bay are much lower than we had anticipated or that we had estimated based on data from other systems. So that creel work really provided us some insight into our impact or the lack of impact in Willapa Bay systems. So that opened up this option of fishing from a floating device for us. In the Chehalis and Hump Tulips River, these are to be determined. We have these ongoing co-manager conversations taking place this week and as long as we need to have them. In the Quinault and Queets, we're planned on being closed November 30th. And this mirrors the national parks regulation as well. So this was joint efforts to make sure we maximize protection for these 2 stocks that are among the steepest decline in wild steelhead across the coastal range. In the Quileute system, this regulation is going to look very similar to last season, but some expanded boat fishing in the Solduck River. So specifically, fishing from a floating device will be allowed in the main stem Quileute and below the hatchery on Solduck, below 101 Bridge on the Kalawa, and below the mouth of Mill Creek. So that's just above the hatchery on the Bogoshiel. And then the Hoh River, we described it through the table and all those words in the map. But specifically, we'll be open December 1 through March 31. That's the plan. Selective gear rules, 1 single point barbless hook. Fishing from a floating device will be allowed Wednesday through Saturday from the mouth to the Oxbow boat ramp, and Sunday through Tuesday from Oxbow to Morgan's Crossing. We'll have a requirement to release wild rainbow trout, and there will be a 2 hatchery steelhead bag limit. So I'm going to pause now. I'll go back to that last slide so folks can take notes or look closer, but I'm going to ask Leah to help me out if folks have questions on any of that.
Awesome. So it looks like our first hand is from Andy. Andy, I have made it so you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I unmuted myself. I think I'm on Bluetooth. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'd like to, I guess, voice my disappointment in allowing fishing from a floating device in the Willapa system. And I know he just hit on that as far as the monitoring says that our impacts are lower, but it only has been monitored when there's been no fishing from a floating device. And I mean, to that point, as far as monitoring goes, I put 20 plus days fishing in there last season, and I think I got checked 3 times. So I kind of suspect on the quality of the monitoring in that area. Whereas in the past, when I go and fish the Forks area, I mean, I think there was a time I got checked twice. Like I'm almost there every day getting checked. Another thing, these are small systems. Like most of these rivers, you couldn't put 2 drift boats or rafts together down large sections of. Pretty easy rivers to fish on foot as it is, even if you're floating and getting out. Now, when you open it up to people fishing from boats, there's also large stretches, significant stretches where you can't get out and fish, like, you know, canyons, difficult wading, so it gives the fish refuge. When people are fishing out of boats, in the past when that was allowed, it made bank fishing really difficult, and people were shore lipping a lot of fish. Now, if the goal is to continue conservation, I think it'd make a lot of sense to continue that regulation and give these fish places where they have refuge, you know, continue the quality of the fishery. And the other point I'd like to make is without opening fishing from a boat in specifically the Chehalis tributaries and at least the Quinault, some of the South Coast tributaries, the guides that typically would operate in those areas that don't want to join the crowds that are already in existence in the Forks area, they're going to come down there. And I don't think that that's sustainable for those fisheries, because I think I made this point the last time, is these have some of, you know, even though it's good for these fisheries, they still have lower returns than most of the other coastal tributaries. So I would like to see a reconsideration of fishing from a boat in those rivers. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate the feedback there.
Our next hand is from Matthew. Matthew, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, how's your guys' day going?
Hey, Matthew, you tell me, how's our day going?
It's going, man. Hey, I appreciate you guys. I just got out of the Air Force, so I really understand where you guys are coming from on a lot of this. I know you guys take a lot from the public and whatnot, so I just want to say thanks for what you guys do and whatnot. But quick question: you guys kind of mentioned how the Chehalis was like 1,000 fish under escapement. In that case, I know the Skookumchuck is still going to remain open. So in that case, kind of my question is, like, if the Queets isn't making an escapement either, why is it that the salmon will be closed? Why can't the salmon kind of mirror the Skookumchuck in that situation?
Yeah, good point. And Matt, thanks for the feedback and the appreciation for our work. I really appreciate that. I want to make it really clear. We should not say, and I'm not being critical of you, but we should not say the Skookumchuck's going to be open. There's a lot of work that still needs to happen in the next, 48 hours if we were going to open that by December 1. So at this point, it's really uncertain if that Chehalis plan is going to move forward. But one key component, one thing we're really proud of that plan is the intensity and level of monitoring associated with it. So we've heard for years now that hatchery directed fisheries in the Chehalis are really important to people. They're really important to conservation, getting those fish off the spawning grounds. And, we raise and release those fish to be caught. So there's the monitoring component and the hatchery pieces that have led us to really prioritizing the work around those areas. If we wanted to reprioritize and say, okay, with our limited resources, we want to not focus so hard on Skookumchuck or Wainuchi. Let's go focus really hard on tributaries of the Queets system that have hatchery fish. That's a discussion we could have. So this year, we've prioritized Grace Harbor. That's the long story short with those limited resources. I also want to flag, though, among all of these conservation concerns on the coast, those that are the most severe should be considered in the Queets. So there we have the steepest decline. As Kelly mentioned, the lowest abundance ever recorded. The 3 lowest years ever are in the last 4 years, I think. So maybe 5, but the Queets is an area of special consideration. We're really worried about it. So we've prioritized monitoring right around those hatchery racks in Grace Harbor.
Oh yeah, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, you too. Really appreciate it, Matthew.
Okay, our next hand is from Wes. Wes, you can unmute yourself.
Good evening. Couple of questions. One, what is the expected tribal fishery this year in the Queets? And two, for Kelly, y'all saying we actually have an agreement for the escapement goal on the Queets with the Quinault Indian Nation, the 4,200? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, so I didn't hear Kelly say well, I'll let Kelly speak to the escapement goal because it sounded like you were interested in his response. And then for the level of harvest we've heard from our co-managers in both the Queets and the Quinault, we haven't seen this, specifically, but what we've heard from them is, exploitation rates ranging from 20 to 30% in those systems. And then we have seen schedules. There's emergency regulations that went out from the tribe, an intention on fishing commercial and guide fisheries on reservation in both the Queets and the Quinault. So the specific details of those fisheries, we don't have in hand at this time, but
I'm lost. There can't possibly be that much room between the forecast and the escapement goal from what you presented to sustain to accommodate even a 20%.
Yeah, I appreciate your opinion on that. So I just want to make it clear to everybody, the state's not managing these tribal fisheries, right? These are sovereign governments managing their fisheries out here on the coast. So, but respect your opinion there. And there's also details of these plans that are probably best shared from our tribal co-managers. So, but that's what we know as of now. But our plan for the sport fisheries and also joint effort with the national park is to close both the Queets and Quinault to all non-treaty sport fisheries. So, and then Kelly, did you want to add anything about Queets escapement goal?
I would just say that I did not say that we have an agreed to escapement goal. Just confirm that, clarify that.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Wes.
Okay, our next hand is from Eric. Eric, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I just have two very quick clarification questions from earlier in the presentation. When you say Willapa system, is that all the tribs of Willapa Bay, not just Willapa River itself, correct?
Yeah, and we'll have in the emergency regulation that's planned to go out, Wednesday, latest Thursday, you'll see each one of those tributaries specifically called out if it's a change from the permanent regulation.
Okay. And my other quick question, I thought I heard you say, so you have ongoing negotiations with the tribes on Chehalis and Hump. You're hoping for that same news release you said Wednesday? Is that what we can kind of expect, or?
Yeah, so best case scenario, the entire coastal season is planned. Best case is as soon as possible. I think everybody here can agree. But I will say, if the conversations that go on this week, if those are delayed or in any way, require, another week of work or a week after that, those will not delay these other regulations that you see listed here. So our plan is to move forward with the Willapa, Quinault, Queets, Quileute, and Hoh, and also include the Chehalis and Hump tulips in that package. But we've worked really hard on these Chehalis and Hump tulips plans. We're really proud of them. They're important to us. So we're going to do whatever it takes to get those ones out the door. And if they have to become separate from the rest, that's an alternative we could explore.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, it looks like our next hand is from Patrick. Patrick, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good evening. Just regarding Chehalis, is it are we, if we cannot come to an agreement with the tribes in time, are we going to stay status quo with our NOAA agreed to fishery of December on the Chehalis Basin for salmon? And is the leftover salmon funding going to be rolled over into any steelhead monitoring?
Yeah, so a couple pieces. So I'm going to answer the second one first, and maybe you can help me, Patrick. It's good to hear from you, by the way. So would you mind repeating your first question? I sort of went down a couple train of thought there, Patrick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I didn't describe it good. You came out with the proposed ideas for this winter's fisheries. It's kind of a two-part question. So if we did get agreement from the tribes with what you guys have crafted for Chehalis, would that close the main stem Chehalis for our salmon fishery that we're doing right now?
Yes.
So that would, so it would.
Well,
December.
so thanks. I kind of got rattled there, Patrick, but yeah, so if we, the plan that we've put forward is looking at those 4 tributaries. I'll put them up here so you can see them again. These 4 systems below hatcheries during the steelhead management period that starts December 1. It would close those other systems that you can see not highlighted or not in the map. These would be closed to fishing.
Okay.
Our current intent right now, we really prioritizing these co-manager agreements. This is how we want to move forward with these fisheries. And so starting December 1, we're in the steelhead management period with an extreme conservation concern for these fish. And then the second part, and you can jump back in if I missed something here. A lot of this monitoring money that occurs in December and January, right? This overlaps salmon and steelhead. So we have some resources available right now to focus in these 4 areas you see highlighted. And that's what we want to do. If these fisheries were closed, all of a sudden, that's where these resources would need to be shifted to some other area. But our intent and our full court press right now is to put the limited resources we have on these 4 areas.
Right. Okay. So if you guys cannot come to an agreement by Wednesday, will we just continue status quo and continue salmon fishing into December?
I'm gonna let Kelly jump in if I get this wrong, but to move into the steelhead management period, December 1, without a signed agreement, fishing for salmon, that'd be an alternative to this plan right now.
Right. But we do have a signed agreement to prosecute a salmon fishery through the end of December, though, already.
So Patrick, I really appreciate this question. Appreciate how in tune you are to these fisheries. You're always a source of really good information for me, and I appreciate your calls and your texts. That's part of the conversation we're having with the co-managers here this week. It'll start off on Wednesday, and we got a formal government to government scheduled for Friday morning. So that's all part of the conversation we're having with the co-managers.
Right. Oh, I just don't want to see myself and other people be on the river December 1 and thinking that we're going to continue status quo and until we hear otherwise, and then middle of the day on Friday or December 1st, we get word that we can't be there.
Yeah, fair enough. Appreciate that. And we don't want that either.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leah, if you're talking, you're on mute. I can't see hands. There might be somebody.
Oh my goodness. I was just completely talking, James.
No problem.
So I'm going to take a second here to take a question from the chat. Connor, if you would like to ask your question live, you can now unmute yourself.
Yeah, let me know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I'm specifically interested in some of the information that you shared with the Hoh River fishery, the evaluation out of the no fishing out of a boat. So you mentioned that this was going to be a 1-year survey, and I'm wondering how there is going to be any significant data capture in a 1-year survey, especially with the sounding of changing between monitoring in the middle and the lower stretch on the lower Wednesday through Saturday, and then the middle every other day of the week. Is there an intent for this to be the start of a longer term survey? I just find it a little difficult for a 1-year survey to replicate or capture enough data to make any decisions based on 1 year of information?
Yeah, Connor, first I'll say great points. We've been a pretty big group of us here at Fish and Wildlife have been digging into this and trying to come up with the best study plan we can. So even after this call, if you got any ideas, it'd be great to have you jump into this conversation formally if you're thinking about this from a scientific perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yep.
yeah, 1 year of data is a challenge, right? This sounds a lot like N equals 1. The sample size is small. But the beauty in this study and a variety of designs we explored is each one of these time periods, each week can be analyzed as its own separate piece of data. So we're going to be comparing the no fishing from a boat to the fishing from a boat in every single week of the year across a variety of flow regimes and time periods. So when we do that, and you can imagine for the folks that lead this creel work, Amy and others out here on the coast, and Hannah and Jenny, this is a huge math problem to make sure you sample enough people in the limited time we have available to make sure this is meaningful. We imagine across all the weeks of this fishery, hundreds and hundreds of individuals will be contacted using this variety of gear, and the sample size will not be the problem. The issue, so, and I want to say too, we could talk a lot about this because I'm pretty interested in it, but an alternative to this plan was we alternate weeks, not days. So in 1 week, you could fish the lower Hoh from a boat, and in another week, you could fish the middle Hoh, and we would alternate by weeks. This is actually a better study design. It allows more time for these fish to move through these different areas. And we like it a little more, but if you're an angler, stat week or the week number is not something that you're used to using. That'd be extremely frustrating to figure out which week it is. So we think this is a nice balanced approach. We're going to get a ton of data. If we do this right, Connor, we have pretty high certainty that we're going to come out of this with a pretty solid estimate of the savings associated with the rule, specifically in the Hoh. The one other note here is when we try to talk about other systems, so we learned something really strong about the Hoh across different flow and different effort, and that's pretty cool. But how do we apply it has been a big question for us. So we have other places that we've had other creel done, fishing from a boat and not from a boat. We can then bring in this 1 year of data and compare it across different systems where it's been more of a scattered approach without a clear study design, and bring some power into places like the Solduck or Willapa Bay. So short answer is we're really confident while only 1 year of data, there's going to be a really big sample size here.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. That's definitely something, if you have contact, that I could be involved in. I've got a lot of experience in creel surveys and fisheries management, and this sort of thing. So this stuck out to me. And I think going back to the idea of not changing, focusing on the days of the week versus independent weeks. I mean, that's something that other folks across different user groups, like waterfowl hunting, for example, with the difference in time changes for legal shooting light, right? Like that changes on a week by week basis. So that wouldn't be out of the question to assume the general public could understand a week over week difference in what is allowed and not allowed for fishing versus not fishing out of a boat. So just definitely interested in hearing more about this. And if there's information that you can share after the fact, would love to have some further conversations with you on it.
Great. Yeah, Connor, we want to get this right. So I'm hoping this week, if you got time, we can schedule some time to talk more about it. So
yeah, sounds good. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, our next hand is from David. David, you can unmute yourself.
Hey guys, good evening. I got a question for you. This is specifically on the queets. Okay. Obviously the park, I understand they're trying to close it because of the low escapement. What has been the conversation with the tribe, the Quinault tribe? And again, I have property there. What is above the Clearwater Bridge? And I'm still seeing gill nets out. So I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, so we've been really clear with our tribal co-managers there that the conservation concern is really high. We're not so much, we're worried about this year. We were worried about last year. But for us, a system that we could expect 10 to 12,000 wild steelhead coming back to during a time when some of these other systems are showing signs of positive, response to the conservation that, us and co-managers and other watersheds have demonstrated. Like, we're not seeing that from the Queets or the Quinault. So we're expressing that concern. We're designing regulations that we know are responsible and meet our conservation objectives. And when it comes to our tribal co-managers there and their fisheries, we just make sure, we're a really active participant in the co-manager process and sharing our values. So we'll keep doing that work. There's also some long-term planning to nail down escapement objectives that we agree on. That's hard work, but it's been on our radar, and we continue to talk about how bad we need to do that. So that's part of the long-term plan.
Understood. That's one of my favorite steelhead fisheries over the last 40 years. And it's pretty sad to me to see that thing's been shut down, especially in the park. Obviously you just need a catch card. But there's been, I'm not sure the escapement goals are there and where they're. Personally, I've never seen a creel checker on that river. I'm just letting you know that.
Yeah, and we don't have creel resources on that river. The Olympic National Park years ago did really intensive creel, collected some really great data. So we have some older data that we can look at to anticipate what effort could look like. But yeah, David, you won't get checked specifically in the Queets because we've been closed for a number of years, but those resources are one limitation. But for us, wild steelhead spawning is probably the number one limitation for us in the Queets and the Quinault.
Okay,
thanks for your feedback. Yeah, I share, many of us on this call share a strong interest in fishing the Queets again. So.
Okay, our next hand is from Brian. Brian, go ahead.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Hey, first of all, I want to say I appreciate the additional opportunity for boat fishing that you're providing on the Quileute system. I think you're being very responsive to what a number of people ask for there to on the Sole Duck to open up a little bit more area. I also appreciate your approach to the Hoh. That's going to open up some boat fishing. I know a lot of us love to float that river and to fish out of a boat there. And if you can do some experiment and see what get better data, I appreciate what you're doing there. I want to echo what I think a lot of other people have said is it's very troubling to see the Queets and the Quinault shut down. The upper Quinault, I will note that your forecast is for above your escapement goal up there. And yet we're still seeing no fishing allowed, which suggests to me that, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, James or Kelly, but that you guys are very concerned about what the tribes are doing, just like you were last year. And what you told us last year, you were very concerned about that. And that's why we didn't have any opportunity. I know this is a very difficult area and that the state cannot directly regulate the tribes unless it fulfills a very difficult standard, but there is other options, including going back to the United States District Court and its continuing jurisdiction to, if you can't get some agreement with respect to escapement goals and fisheries that allow both the tribe and the state's recreational fisheries to enjoy some fisheries on these two rivers, I just find it very troubling if the tribe's going to go in there and getting fish with a 20 to 30% exploitation rate, which I think you referenced, James, and yet the sport fishery is going to be completely shut down. I think that's very problematic to me. And I know we got to put conservation first, but you guys also as trustees for the state and the recreational fisheries here have to make sure that the recreational fishery gets its fair share as well. So I'm hoping, Kelly, that maybe during this formal government to government consultation that this can definitely be a subject that is addressed and hopefully make some progress on, because I know, James, I asked you about this on the October 1st town hall, and you said you guys were involved in a lot of conversations, and I trust that you were, but it doesn't seem like it's worked. And I don't want to read too much into the National Park Service's press release, but they specifically referenced the commercial fishery as being one of the problems with respect to the Queets and why they shut it down to recreational angling. So it's very problematic, and I know you guys got some very difficult political hurdles to overcome, but it's now it's going to be 2 years in a row now, and I don't want to see this kind of evolve into something like, on the Skokomish or something where all of a sudden it's shut down forever and it becomes the status quo. So anyway, thanks for your efforts. I do very much hopefully you get a hatchery focus fisheries on the Chehalis system as well, because it's very important for those guys down there to be able to have some steelheading after being closed down for a couple of years. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so a couple quick notes there. We are in co-manager discussions, and we have been, week after week, and those are fruitful. I do want to share, though, that in the co-manager relationship, if we're uncomfortable with the level of harvest of our co-managers, we share that and we're open about it. So nothing being hidden there. But there's another piece of this puzzle. So that's a really important one, right? Co-manager relationship. We need to be comfortable with each other's harvest plans. But I also just want to highlight in the upper Quinault system, we're talking about 100. So we are above our escapement goal, but we're talking about a sport impact limit of 135 wild steelhead. So extremely tight margin of error. No creel monitoring resources set up to, monitor the upper Quinault fishery. So I would say this is good that it's above our escapement goal, but even with co-manager agreement and shared conservation values and agreement on escapement objectives, we would still be in a tight spot on the upper Quinault due to that low abundance. So just want to flag that that's still a concern of ours. But thanks again for the feedback, Brian. I appreciate it.
Okay, our next person I'm going to ask if they want to bring their question or comment in from the chat is Jeff Brazda. Jeff, you can unmute yourself. Okay, and Jeff might not want to ask his live, so we're going to keep on rolling and go to Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate the town hall and appreciate all the work you do. And that was really more of just that. I mean, I know we've been in this process now for a couple, 3 or 4 years, and I look at in each one of our systems, we're getting a little bit back each year, and we're learning a little bit more about steelhead. So I appreciate all the work you guys are doing. I appreciate this Hoh fishery that you guys are looking at. I think that'll help a lot in the future and point to where we can open that up to more spots. So that was really all I had, other than I guess I was a little disappointed with the park coming out with their press release before the end of this, before this town hall meeting set. I would hope that you guys would have expressed to them that this is a joint thing between the park, the state, and the tribes. And they kind of took the air out of the sails a little bit prior to this meeting. They could have easily held their press release till tomorrow after the town hall, after you guys let us go, because a lot of people were already upset and already coming into this town hall meeting with deflated sails. So hopefully you express that to them a little bit. Other than that, I think you guys are doing a great job. Thanks for working so hard and getting a little bit more for us each year.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and I try not to speak for the park, but I do want to flag there. You know, Sam Brinkman leads the fishery work there. We're in close coordination. And we were in a similar place, the state and the national park, for places like Queets and Quinault, you know, in terms of our perspective on the conservation concern. The other thing that sort of made us kind of bifurcate in terms of our coordination was a risk of a government shutdown. Not making excuses for the park, but there was a lot of concern a couple weeks ago about how they were going to get their rules out if they were shut down. So, you know, I had a little bit of sympathy for my colleagues over there worried about that government shutdown. But then, Bob, I also just want to thank you for your engagement. We've thanked other people on this call that have really just been here from the beginning and stuck with it, and just really appreciate, you know, the level of engagement this year and those in the past.
Thank you.
Okay, our next person from the chat is going to be Martin. Martin, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hey everyone, how's it going?
Good.
Good. Yeah, hey, yeah, these look awesome. I think, like, James, this is a really nice set of proposal or set of regulations for the next year, and it gives a lot of opportunity to a lot of people. So I think you guys did a really nice job with that. So first thing I want to say is thank you. My question, I realized the tribe and like they're co-managers in this, and I can tell, James, that you're kind of like, you know, I don't want to make you say anything that that you're trying to dance around or be uncomfortable or anything, but I was just curious, is there a source that the general public can see how many like wild steelhead that is the tribe taking from each system?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And thanks for the kind words. So the best source is to contact the tribe. You know, there's a group of really great fisheries biologists and managers there with our tribal co-managers that field calls just like us. So I'd say reaching out to the tribe is helpful. I also want to remind folks, the last couple of years we've shared the tribal impact, the harvest of wild steelhead in these town hall events. So Martin, in our last town hall, you can download the presentation and see kind of the summary of the harvest from our coastal tribes. And I think that's the best source. Good question, though. Thanks, Martin.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Awesome. Our next hand is from Reve. Reve, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you guys for the presentation. I just had a question about co-manager agreements for the Hoh and the Quileute. And I brought this up before for the last couple of years, but the selective gear rules weren't mentioned as savings the past 3 years since the emergency regulations were put into effect. Will those be included this year?
You're talking about in the math or in the harvest management plans?
In the math, you know, in the savings, the first year it only mentioned no fishing from a boat. And the second year, you know, I brought that up and you put in April, but those selective gears haven't been explicitly attributed to savings.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do would be for us to dig into that, you know, offline, but I just want to make sure Jenny has a chance if there's something we're missing there, Jenny, with some of that math that you and your team have done.
Yeah, hi, Reve. I think we discussed this just a little bit through emails, but savings for no fishing from a boat and selective gear rules were kind of lumped together into savings. And I guess I just want to also highlight that they're all estimated savings, not easy to measure, especially without a creel and the Quileute. So more theoretical savings than measured at this point.
Yeah, and we talked about that, but I think words matter, and that it's just not listed there is concerning and has been. So I'm just hoping that you guys put that in there, even if it is lumped together.
Okay, well.
Thanks, Rebay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Okay, our next person from the chat. Oh, never mind. We're gonna go with Gabe Miller. Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the department taking the time to put this together. I appreciate them expanding some opportunity up there on the North Coast. That's good. The more time we can get on the water and more time out of the boat, the better. There's a lot of people that want to participate in that. Question I had was as far as the Chehalis system, and it sounds like there's some uncertainty as to whether we're going to be able to prosecute the remainder of the salmon season if we don't come to some sort of agreement on steelhead. Will the department consider, there's impacts to use there. Will the department consider just going ahead and prosecuting that salmon fishery if we don't come to some sort of agreement on steelhead?
Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, we've modeled that, a salmon fishery during that time period, and the impacts, we exceed the impacts quickly with a full-scale Chehalis fishery in December and January. But we understand there's like a, intent on a coho fishery there. The other thing I want to note is we talked about this, so there's this North of Falcon process where we talk about salmon. There's this process where we talk about steelhead. The two overlap, but not in the processes. So last year at North of Falcon, people said, if you're going to close December 1, why are we planning a salmon fishery there? So Mike Scharf and his team modeled what would happen if we just at North of Falcon planned for a salmon fishery closure December 1 and moved those impacts somewhere else. And we explored that option with folks. You don't save that many fish that you can put in another place. So we knew going into North of Falcon that there was a high likelihood that that December fishery wasn't going to stick once we got to the steelhead management period. So it's not like I can say, yeah, we knew this would happen, but that December salmon fishery, we knew there was a ton of uncertainty in a system where we haven't met escapement in a lot of years for steelhead. So I don't want to allude to folks that, yeah, December 1, if we close for steelhead or don't get co-manager agreement to go fishing, we're going to go for even a more ambitious schedule in December. So I think the answer is no, but if we get to that point at the end of this week where we're looking at, we can't secure this Chehalis steelhead fishery, we can talk about, is there some kind of salmon fishery we can salvage?
Okay, thanks. Even if it's a couple weeks into the first 2 weeks of December and select trips, whatever we have to work with, I think it's important to try to keep people on the water as long as possible.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gabe. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, our next hand is from Jacob. Jacob, go ahead.
Hey, James. Thanks for all your hard work and all the team's work. I really appreciate what you're doing. One quick question I have is for the Hoh River. Are there currently any tie-in surveys planned for the creel surveys to get an more exact number with flights or anything?
Yeah, Jacob, this is fun because you're giving me an opportunity to just stick one of my friends on the call. Amy, can you help us out with that, the tie-in piece with the Hoh?
Yeah, so we Hannah, I kind of help with those surveys up there, but Hannah Dotterwich is one of the leading that crew up there. So she's been doing the flights currently for the salmon season. And we do have 2 per month scheduled through the steelhead season as well. So the plan is to continue. I don't know if you've been up there during the salmon season yet and seen the helicopter, but we've been going out twice per month when we can. Of course, weather is always challenging with those tie-in surveys, utilizing the helicopters, but yeah, plan is to continue to do that through this season. Yes.
Hey, and Amy, for folks on the call that don't know this piece, maybe can you give us the 30-second version of what a tie-in survey is?
Sure. It's just it's where you've seen us out there, depending on the areas, we either blitz it via helicopter to count anglers, or depending, like in the Willapa, we utilize boats because the streams are too small. But it's another way for us to kind of get a more accurate estimate of effort So that when we expand that catch into effort, it's a more accurate estimate that way. Essentially allows us to we compare the number of people that we're seeing like via the cars to the actual number of bodies we're seeing on the river. So that way, like when we're at especially mixed use areas where you might have hikers or people that are not fishing, and we're utilizing those car counts to get a proxy for the number of anglers that are there. Gives us a correction factor, or say we have people that are entering the fishery that are maybe not at the access points that we can get to, like private access points. It helps us account for that. So it's just it's a way for us to recalibrate our effort and get a more accurate effort estimate for the creel.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Okay, our next hand is from Ty. Ty, go ahead.
Hey guys, I want to thank you guys again for having another town hall and all your hard work, and then all the comments from everyone with all their viewpoints. You guys can hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I want to first agree with all of Kratzer's comments concerning the park and their early release of the regulations. And then I also want to strongly support all the increased fishing from the boats and on the Chehalis, all the liberalization of the fisheries, especially the Willapa too. And I think the angler that called him with a concern, I think you guys, you checked him 3 of 20 times. That's 15%. Maybe you guys know better than me, but that seems like pretty good creel. But regardless, the only other comment I would have is any other liberalizations, if possible, on any of those hatchery streams. It's a little early to tell. We'll know after this rain, but it appears that there may be an increase, at least in hatchery returns, better than we've seen in 5 or 6 years. So anyways, thanks guys. That's all I had on my comments.
Thank you, Ty.
And our next comment is from Patrick. Patrick, you can unmute yourself.
I don't know. Oh, here's what I said. Oh, I was gonna ask, why are we specifically doing this no boat study in the Hoh and not another system like the Quileute with a higher escapement? And what is the expected cost of the study? And is there an update on the sonar stuff that you keep alluding to?
Yeah. There's a lot of pieces there, but there's a whole bunch of reasons we wouldn't do it on the Quileute. Number one, a full creel on the Quileute is extremely expensive. We don't have anywhere near the resources to do it. And that lack of resources limits other things on the Quileute too. We design a fishery without a intensive monitoring plan. So we're keeping a close eye on the Quileute, even without that creel monitoring. So to design a study without the creel monitoring that would take there, it just wouldn't work. That said, on the sole duck last year, we're going to learn a lot about what happens when you open a section of the sole duck to fishing out of a boat that wasn't the year prior. So there is some information we're going to get from the sole duck because we are intensively creeling that. For the Hoh, what does this cost in terms of monitoring? So we have a specific budget that's we've been applying to the Hoh creel program for years now. We're going to use that same budget. The main cost is brain power, mathematical expertise from the science division, and a whole bunch of hard thinking. So one person earlier mentioned these tie-in surveys, and Amy did a great job of describing them. We have this awesome creel that we polished over the last couple of years in the Hoh. We're asking Hannah and her team and Amy, who you just heard from, and Jenny and others to think about how you can design that same creel within these small sections of river. So your tie-ins got to do different things that it didn't do, that it needed to do before. So not much of a budget change from last season, but a whole bunch of resource, just late night thinking hard. So I think we can all say this is a one-time shot. The other thing, Patrick, is the Hoh has those about 500 fish on the board, right? For us to limit impacts toward. So we got to make sure we don't exceed those. So we are uncomfortable with a full season fishery, allow your boat wherever you want to fish on the Hoh. The math doesn't work out, but we're pretty confident the math, this 498 fish or whatever it is, lines up pretty well and leaves a bit of a buffer there for us to run this study, and also allows us to adjust if we get to the end of February and we were wrong about some of that math. So a lot of pieces, but the Quileute doesn't fit in unless we were going to take a bunch of boat opportunity away in the Quileute and get a bunch more money for Creel. So
Right. No, that makes sense. I forget what is the budget allowed for the Hoh creeling program?
I don't have that number handy, Patrick, but I can email you the amount of money we spend on Creel. Unless Amy's just got it at the tip of her tongue, or Jenny, feel free to share that number. But I also don't want to give a bad number, get it wrong.
Okay.
But yeah, Patrick, let me know what you're thinking, and we can get you the number, and we've got a supplemental budget request right now for Creel in the entire coast, and we've identified how much it would cost every river in the coastal range to Creel. So those numbers are available. We'll email them to you if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks.
Okay, and as you all can tell, I'm circling back through some people have already talked. If you want, feel free to raise your hand if you have any more questions. We're out of new hands. And we are at Reve. Reve, go ahead.
Thanks again. It wasn't clear. I know you guys mentioned some increased opportunity in April, and bait usage during hatcheries were things that a lot of people had mentioned. And it wasn't clear if how that had been integrated into the modeling results, especially with the Quileute potentially being able to be status quo with a small margin of error. Can you speak to those two?
The first, you kind of cut out there, Rebecca. I didn't hear the very first part of your question.
So
which pieces of the modeling were you wondering about?
The Hoh and the Quileute, and more opportunity for April or bait usage in the early hatchery season.
Yeah, so two pieces there. These are great questions, and these are ones we've been struggling with. So there's interest in folks using bait, and specifically in December, January, beginning of February when hatchery fish are there. So we talk about this, impact that we don't want to, disproportionately place at the early end of the run. So we're trying to protect steelhead that enter throughout the entire run. So when we look at these bait, any kind of gear restriction that we apply in one place and not the other, we become concerned. So we're looking at, is there some kind of gear that we can apply not just in December, but, put across the board? So that's one concern of ours when we talk about just using bait in December, January, because we know bait increases encounters on steelhead. And then in terms of April, we've been thinking about impacts for sure, abundance, and we know fishing's really good in April, and so impacts go up. So that's on our mind. It's expensive for steelhead impacts in April, but we're also worried about fish that have already run through the fishery for multiple months. So a fish that enters in January has been encountered potentially by the same fishery for multiple months. So those April fish, probably dealt with a higher impact. There's other things that are tough to quantify, like kelts. We know these fish we showed last town hall fish are in the system for longer after they spawn. They like the lower river. They delay their migration in April and May, so they're super susceptible. We know those fish are really important. So there's a number of sort of concerns around that April fishery that has kept us out of it this season as well. And not all of them are just in terms of abundance in that one sort of row of numbers I share. A lot of them are diversity, productivity, distribution. So April is a tricky month to design a steelhead fishery.
Isn't the tribe have a heavier netting schedule early in the season in order to target hatchery? I just don't understand the philosophy that we have more impact. We have to be concerned about spreading out the impacts equally when there's more hatchery in the system and a lot less wild fish to impact.
Yeah, and we should, we've spent, I think the last 3 years of town halls digging in really deep to this diversity, distribution, productivity piece, and why those December, January fish are low in abundance, but really important in terms of diversity. So we're going to protect those fish for sure. And the way we've done it in places where the margin's tight, like the Chehalis, where it's really tight, and we're talking about every fish, is we spread, you know, that 10% exploitation rate that the statewide steelhead management describes. We spread it across months. So we try to impact 10% of the early fish, but no more than 10%, just like the late, late entering fish. So this is not perfect math, Reve, especially in places we don't creel or monitor. And so, we're doing our best with that. The other piece you mentioned is tribal fisheries. We have these conversations with our tribal co-managers, and in most cases, our tribal co-managers are designing fisheries that share a lot of the same values. So I don't know what more I could say about a specific tribal fishery that impacts December fish different than late, but that's what we're targeting in our sport fisheries, is spreading those impacts across the run.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, thanks, Reve.
And it looks like we have a new hand. Guy, go ahead. Guy, you can unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I'm really impressed with, over the years here, the increased, folks are asking really good questions now. I think the town hall is working really well. I'm really happy to see that. One of the things I see here is, in order to understand the effect of these regulations, we need more money. And I'm wondering, James and Kelly, if there's any need to get an endorsement for coastal water to try to get a little more money from the anglers to help out, so we can understand these things.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll take a stab at that, James.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, so really appreciate that question. Folks that have been tracking kind of the department's legislative requests over the last 8 or 10 years will remember that we went after a bit of a fee increase here a couple times, and were summarily slapped down by both the public and the legislature. And we haven't felt like there's been the appetite to consider additional endorsements. In fact, the Columbia River salmon and steelhead endorsement that was in place for a long, long time, I think since 2009, was sunsetted by the legislature here a few years ago. So we just don't feel the appetite is there for an endorsement. As James mentioned, we've taken a different approach for the coast, and we've got a supplemental request out right now that we think goes a long way in getting us where we need to be with monitoring and evaluation efforts out there on the coast. So we're really hopeful that that's successful. The governor's office is considering it right now. We've fielded a number of different questions about the request. So we're hanging our hat on the supplemental request rather than going after an endorsement or otherwise increasing fees on anglers.
I understand that. That's good. Thank you very much. And again, I think I see an evolution. I see a really good participation through this town hall process. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Guy.
All right, our next person in the chat is Duncan. Duncan, you can unmute yourself.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks for having this town hall, you guys. I appreciate it. My questions are mostly about, have these models accounted for like increased angling pressure on the Hoh and the Quileute systems? I've noticed with the last couple of years of the lower peninsula rivers being closed and the Skagit as well, that angling pressure has increased, just, anecdotally. And I'm wondering if these models account for that. And especially with regards to the Hoh, I fished the Hoh probably 30 days last year, and I got creel 3 times. So I'm wondering how much more enforcement's going to be involved.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the question about whether we account for increased effort in places we don't creel, and we haven't traditionally, monitored through creel surveys. We used to, years ago, kind of have this expansion for encounters based on catch record card data. We saw hatchery encounter rates, from the 80s to current kind of go up. So we could see this kind of prediction of people were either getting better at catching fish or there were just more people out there doing it, or maybe both. So we did apply that in the past. Now that we have creel data, we can measure changes in encounter rates directly. So, folks on this call could speak directly to the observed changes in effort in places like the Hoh, specifically in the last 2 years. But the key for us will be, continuing to measure this and monitor our fisheries in the way we should be, get those resources to be out there and really measure these changes in effort. And so in general, Duncan, we're using recent year averages to estimate how many fish are going to get caught and how many people are going to show up. But in places like the Quileute, where it looks like, wow, we got a lot of fish and we can design a really ambitious fishery, if we don't have monitoring and we're closing neighboring systems, all of a sudden the uncertainty scale goes way up. So still some unknowns out there, and we just, move forward really cautiously in that situation.
Thank you, Duncan. Our next hand is from Ty. Ty, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks. I just forgot one thing. I wanted to say that relaxing the boat regulations and some of the other rivers will really help spread out the pressure, especially from what you guys saw from the Hoh and some of the other popular systems, get people spread out and could actually help reduce overall impacts all over. So no one really mentioned that. So I hope that's what you guys are thinking too. Thanks again, guys.
That's helpful, Ty. Thanks.
Okay, our last hand for now is Brian. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the follow-up opportunity. James, I just wanted to follow up on something you said. With respect to the Upper Quinault, you highlighted that, in addition to being concerned about the tribal fishery, that you also were concerned about the kind of the low margin of available impacts. And it was 135, which at the 10% release mortality would equate to an allowable catch and release of 1,350 steelhead. And as you probably know, that Upper Quinault doesn't see near the pressure that like the Hoh and the Quileute see. I'm just wondering, did you consider any, I guess, instead of just having it open 7 days a week, no boats, no, artificial lures only, did you consider or model anything like maybe a days per week, like a 3-day per week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday? The reason I ask is I just really hate to see areas continue to be closed off for, year after year, because, we've all seen a lot of our favorite streams be closed and it's very hard to get them opened back up again. So I'm just wondering if you considered anything like that, or if you might consider something like that if some progress can be made at this government to government consultation that's coming up this next week.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, that's good thinking. And the short answer is yes. This table, I'm just going to say, I know it's hard to read. There's a lot happening here, but if you go to the middle of it where Upper Quinault is, you can see there's 2 green boxes, both with asterisks. One of them's, this no boat, no bait, no April. And the other's fish from boat, reduced days. So both of these are extremely tight. We get ourselves close to the 135 fish with both of those. So I do agree with you that effort's lower. I'll just say my wife and I love fishing that Upper Quinault section. It's very fun. And it can feel quieter, but to suggest, without monitoring, to suggest that it's much lower impact, is a big assumption. Some of these systems like the Hoh, we're fishing on the spawning grounds, right? And then other systems, we know fish are moving through the fisheries into the upper tributaries where there's no fishing. So Upper Quinault, tributary poor, a fishery that's just really right on top of important spawning area. I think we should consider that fishery as high impact. And if we model it like the Hoh with no other creel data in place, you know, the 1.13 encounter rate, something like that, and we touch every fish once or more, we get to that 135 fish pretty quick. So what we're arguing here is we would need a monitoring plan for sure to fish with only 135 fish and make the math work, and be confident we're not going to exceed it, especially if the forecast comes in low. And we'd need that co-manager agreement piece. So yeah, still really complex. I don't disagree with all the things you said. I just a good conversation I think we're having about it.
And just curious, how much would you need to see instead of the 135 to be comfortable with it? All right, because I mean, it sounds to me what you're saying, you know, that this could, if we don't have the dollars for monitoring it, this could be just, if this is the rationale, we could be just a permanent closure up there.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, how comfortable are we? All of these fisheries have risk involved. There's some level of risk with every one of these fisheries. So with a statewide steelhead management plan that says, you know, do not exceed the escapement goal, like fish into it, and do not exceed 10% when you're below it. You know, we need good certainty. The good news is, places like the Hoh and the Quileute, these really productive systems, and I'd say the Willapa too, productive systems that we manage appropriately, we may see a response, even despite, you know, ocean conditions and freshwater conditions that are not ideal. So with, you know, a positive response from the Upper Quinault, I should say the Quinault watershed and the Queets, we should expect these systems to be producing enough wild steelhead for us to design a sport fishery. Where I get uncomfortable is when we only have 135 fish, and that becomes the expectation that, you know, we may never fish again. I don't think we should be looking at 135 fish like that's the expectation for the long term in the Upper Quinault. And then not just me, you know, as an agency. So I think, you know, if we manage this thing right, we're going to be back to fishing in the Queets and the Quinault. That's the objective.
Thank you, James. Our next hand is from our next question in the chat was from Raphael. Raphael, you can go ahead and ask it live.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, we
Okay,
can hear
thank
you.
you. Sorry, I'm joining late. Okay, maybe that question has been answered. Is there any plan to monitor our rivers using sonar technologies? This is very heavily used overseas, and it's proven to be a very good technique to evaluate numbers that I feel a lot of us are arguing. How do we monitor the creels, etc.? So is there a plan to use such technologies? And a side comment to that is for people that live in this area, and I see a lot of Washington State Department of Transportation projects involving fish passages. The numbers run into the millions. So I'm also thinking about cross-pollination between agencies and Fish and Wildlife working with the DOTs and try to squeeze a bit of money to actually implement monitoring techniques in those new projects. So sorry, it's a bit broad of a question, but I'd appreciate some feedback. Thank you.
Thanks. Great comments. In terms of collaboration with DOT and other agencies, you know, that's ongoing. Sometimes at a large scale, big coordination, always room for improvement, but sometimes we have these large scale coordination projects. But also folks on this call, you know, myself and teammates, when we're out in the water doing our work and we're brought into DOT projects, culvert repairs, We have outside partners, two conservation organizations on the coast that we work closely with to implement, provide our tools to sort of help that pre and post evaluation of these projects. So always more room for collaboration, and we're looking for ways to improve there. In terms of sonar, I remember now, maybe Patrick, somebody asked a question about sonar that I think I didn't answer. Yes, the short answer is we are currently using sonar in a number of systems in the coastal range, one system in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and a few in Puget Sound. So this technology for us, we're getting up to speed with it. In the supplemental budget request that Kelly mentioned, we have some staff time in there to help with if you're familiar, Raphael, the data kind of post-processing of sonar is really challenging, takes a lot of time. So one thing I want to brag about, if I can, in our science division, colleagues of ours that aren't here today ran a sonar, a new system in the Solduck River, kind of a pilot project in the national park, and gave us weekly updates on summer coho, right? There's very few species moving through the system. It was kind of an easy startup project, and they succeeded. They did a fantastic job first year in the Solduck and showed their ability to monitor fish in real time and share it with us and the co-manager. So we plan on implementing that same team plans on implementing that work in one of our coastal steelhead rivers this season. Again, pilot, but these are really skilled folks on our team. Clayton Kinzel, Marisa Litz are running that show, and they're doing a phenomenal job. So we're moving fast on sonar, asking for more money to keep it going, but thanks for flagging that and give us a chance to brag a little bit. And I'll just say before we go to the next question, Raphael, if you reach out, you may have, you talked about abroad, some technologies. We'd love to hear about what you've worked with. And if you've got some tools maybe we don't know about, please shoot us an email and we can keep the conversation going.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next hand is from Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that, listening to all the conversations and everything, and a lot of it has been around monitoring and the sonars and everything. And I know from being involved with the department in a lot of advisory groups and so forth, is one of the things is they can't really actively advocate for themselves for us to go out and help them secure funding. And I'm telling everybody that's on this call that's not with the department, that's what we need to do. We need to go actively hit our legislators, our senators, Department of Natural Resources. We need to let them know how important these fisheries are to us, how important the winter fisheries are to not only our livelihoods, but our communities. And we need to get our legislators to pass this bill or this budget request to get all this monitoring and going. Sounds like if we had the monitoring, we'd have a fishery in the Upper Quinault. But because we don't. And so anybody that's on here, search me out or whatever. I've got some plans going forward to collaborate with a bunch of other people to try to go get this funding so that we can have the monitoring that we need to have all these fisheries going full blown. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Bob. Our next hand is from Wes. Wes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just throw this out here and challenge the department on a situation like the Quileute, where, yeah, there's uncertainty around the quantification of the impacts, but that doesn't mean you can't take a multi-year strategy where you have a 3-day-a-week fishery in January one year, February the next year, and maybe even a portion of March another year, if you want to spread the impacts out over time on the run and you really don't have the resources to do it as a full effort in one season. You could open it for much less than a full season. You could do 15 total days. We do stuff like that on the Sauk, and the recreational fishers figure it out. It's open 4 days a week for maybe 8 weeks. And it's not even the start, necessarily the start of February through the end of March. It's whenever they say it is. I'm just saying that a month of fishing 4 days a week or 3 days a week of some sort of opening in the upper Quinault would be appreciated and would materially do something to ease pressure in other spots. If you think the people are going to rush there, then you're getting a benefit from somewhere else, would be my assertion. Anyway.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Wes. Our next hand is from Brian. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys for all this. I wanted to hear a little more about how all these regulations affect the ESA listing, and what kind of like the future looks like. What are you guys being more does that impact these regulations out of abundance of caution? Just hear a little more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. We got a team of folks that have been part of the data request from the federal government on the ESA petition. So a lot of us have been thinking really hard about the ESA petition, really from like an assignment we were given, to make sure we support NOAA in their evaluation. But in terms of the season planning process, we have the same responsibility we did last year and the year before. We have the statewide steelhead management plan. That's really our guiding policy document. And so you could look back in time and see places where we didn't live up to that policy. And of course, lessons learned, in those specific years. But these last, this season, last season, when we started hearing about this ESA petition, we still have that same foundation, the statewide steelhead management plan. And so that's what these regulations are a product of, what we've learned the last few years, and applied to kind of expand these fisheries, and especially those where we're seeing potential steelhead response. So I would say everybody on this call on our team has been thinking hard about ESA petition in terms of a data request and assignment. But in terms of the regulations, it's the same guidelines we had last year.
Do you think that kind of allowing more opportunities puts us at risk of impacting that in the future?
Of ESA, well, so it could, expanding opportunity could put us at risk for more ESA petitions, right? Because these petitions can come from anywhere. So if folks are feeling uncertain about coastal steelhead, they can petition for listing. But the decision of whether coastal steelhead are petitioned or not, for us, these regulations, in our mind, are extremely responsible. We've done the math. They meet our policy, and we think this is, these regulations represent the appropriate level of risk for long-term sustainability of coastal steelhead. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that was our last hand for now. Just a reminder for those on phones or a screen somewhere, there may be a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen or a smiley face with the reactions. You can tap that or dial *9 on your phone.
Well, I want to say, or Leah, did we have another question there?
Nope. No.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody, we're kind of at the end of the time here anyway, and everybody stuck it out almost a couple hours. I know myself and my team, really, really appreciate the engagement here. We felt over the last couple of years, we're not alone here, with these conservation concerns and this desire to, design some opportunity that's within those. So really appreciate everybody this last couple of years who's jumped in, and then those that have been here since the beginning of this town hall season for a few years. So Yeah, big thank you. And even on this call, we heard a lot of, appreciation for our work. So I hope my team heard that and we really appreciate it.
So James, if I could just maybe echo those sentiments. Yeah, we've been doing this for a while now, and the feedback, as I said in the opening comments, has been nothing short of essential. And James, if you could put that last slide back up for me. So you took it down. I just want to clarify a couple things and maybe restate what I said at the beginning here. The regulations that James has up, or that he's trying to put up here,
Can you see those now, Kelly?
yeah, they're back up now. So with the Willapa system, everything up there, with the exception of the Chehalis and the hump tulips, you can expect to see in a news release probably on Wednesday. The two again that are up in the air, with the Chehalis and the hump tulips. I don't want anybody to be caught off guard, so we're really going to work hard to get these opened up. It's going to be a challenge to have them opened up by Friday on the 1st, and I don't want anybody sideways with enforcement or anybody else. So please stay tuned to our social media pages, our website, our news releases. But with the exception of those two systems, or those two rivers, even though we don't have fully signed management plans, the director needs to get his eyes on them here over the next day or so. You can pretty much bank on those other rigs being what we promulgate this season.
It looks like Bob has his hand back up. Bob, go ahead.
Hey, James, I just wanted to reach out one more time about that, just the whole bait thing. I think in the bait idea of like the Quileute system, we weren't looking for it so much in the Hoh, but more looking for it just in the bogus shield and in the Kalawa, not in the Solduck, and really only looking through the end of December, not past the end of December, knowing that wild fish are starting to show up. I think we could look at numbers in the past and know that our touching of wild fish in the month of December in either one of those systems is pretty minimal. I really think that we could use bait in that time frame in the bogus shield and the Kalawa for the use of those hatchery fish, and really have zero impacts at all on the wild fish that are there. And it would give majority of that bait thing came more from the locals, that just the folks that a lot of them just aren't fishing anymore because they like to go catch hatchery fish and they want to use bait and they want to go plunking, and they don't get to do that anymore. And so I think it'd be a huge hit for them to be able to have bait for just the month of December in the bogus shield and the Klawa. And so I'm hoping maybe you guys can just look at that and not go anywhere past that. Just go to the end of the month and call it good. But I just wanted to reiterate that before you left.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you very
And
much.
you mentioned that in your OPGA had a formal proposal with that in it, and that wasn't the only person, the only group that wanted to use bait. So, just so you know, other folks are eager to use bait again, and so I just took a note here, and we'll have a discussion about that this week.
I just think if we can trim down the time frame, the amount of impacts that we're worried about would be lessened extremely. We see so few wild fish in December that I think our impacts would be negligible. So thanks, guys.
Okay, Leah, if you don't see anybody's hand up, I think we call it a night.
That sounds good. There's no more hands.
Again, thanks everybody.